My mom asked me to move out so my younger brother could have my room. I thought she had chosen him over me. 10 years later, I learned the truth. The day my mom asked me to move out wasn't loud. There wasn't a huge argument. Nobody slammed doors. No one yelled. Somehow, that made it hurt even more. I was 22 years old, working my first full-time job, and still living at home while saving for a place of my own. Money was tight. Rent in our city had become ridiculously expensive, and my parents had always told me there was no rush to leave. They wanted me to save as much as I could before moving out. So when Mom asked if we could talk after dinner, I assumed it was about helping with bills or maybe repainting the house. Instead, she folded her hands together and quietly said, "I think it's time for you to move out." I smiled. I was planning to next year. She shook her head. "I mean, soon." "How soon?" She looked down at the table. "Within a month." For a few seconds, I honestly thought she was joking. "A month?" She nodded without looking at me. "Your brother needs your room." My younger brother, Adam, had just turned 16. He was a good kid. Quiet. Smart. The type of person who apologized when someone else bumped into him. I frowned. "He already has a room. It's too small." "So?" Mom's voice became softer. "He needs more space." I laughed because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So I'm being kicked out because he wants a bigger bedroom?" Dad finally spoke. "It isn't like that." "Then explain it." Neither of them did. Instead, Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I know this feels unfair." I pulled my hand away. "It doesn't feel unfair. It is unfair." That was the first time in my life I'd ever walked away from the dinner table before everyone had finished eating. Over the next few weeks, I packed my belongings into boxes. My parents helped. Adam offered to carry things to my car. I refused. Not because I hated him, because every time I looked at him, I was reminded that I was losing my home. The strangest part was Adam himself. He didn't seem happy. If anything, he looked guilty. The day I loaded the last box into my car, he quietly handed me an envelope. "I know you're angry." I looked at him. "I'm not angry with you." He nodded slowly. "I know. But don't open this until you're ready." Before I could ask what he meant, Mom called him back inside. I drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. For years, I convinced myself I'd gotten over it. I built a career, rented a small apartment, eventually bought my own place. I still visited my parents on birthdays and holidays. But something had changed. The house never felt like home again. Every time I walked past my old bedroom, the door was closed. Every single time. Even at Christmas. Even when guests came over. I always assumed Adam simply liked his privacy. Then, 10 years later, I got a phone call from my dad. His voice sounded older than I remembered. "Can you come home? Is everything okay?" There was a long pause. Then he quietly said, "It's about your mother." I drove there as fast as I could. When I arrived, the house looked exactly the same. The same front garden. The same old porch swing. The same blue front door. Only this time, Adam was waiting for me outside. He hugged me tighter than he ever had before. Then he looked at me and quietly said, "I'm sorry I kept the secret for so long." I frowned. What secret? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and handed me the very same envelope he'd given me 10 years earlier. Still sealed. Still addressed to me. Across the front, in my mother's handwriting, were 6 words I'd never noticed before. "Open this when you can forgive me." I stared at the envelope for a long time. The edges were worn. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. He had really kept it all these years. "You never opened it?" I asked. Adam shook his head. "It wasn't mine." I slowly ran my thumb under the seal. For 10 years, I'd imagined what I would say if my parents ever apologized. Now that the moment had finally come, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first line made my eyes fill with tears before I'd even finished the sentence. "My dearest son, if you're reading this, it means I wasn't brave enough to tell you the truth face to face." I swallowed hard and kept reading. "I know you think we chose your brother over you. I know you think we pushed you out because we loved him more. If I were in your place, I would probably believe the same thing." My hands started shaking. I looked up at Adam. He quietly nodded. "Keep reading." The next paragraph explained why my parents had never defended themselves. Not because they didn't care. Because someone had begged them not to tell me. That someone was Adam. I looked at him in disbelief. "You?" He lowered his head. "I'm sorry." I looked back at the letter. 3 months before we asked you to move out, Adam collapsed at school. My heart stopped. I turned the page faster. There were copies of old hospital reports tucked inside the envelope. Dates. Doctors' names. Test results. Everything from the same month. I remembered that period. Adam had missed school for a while. Mom kept saying it was just a virus. I never questioned it. According to the reports, it wasn't a virus. It was a serious blood disorder. One that required months of treatment, regular hospital visits, and strict precautions to avoid infections. The doctors recommended converting the larger downstairs bedroom into a temporary recovery room. It was the only room in the house that could easily be adapted because it had direct access to the bathroom and enough space for medical equipment. My room. I stared at the pages. The words blurred together. No, that couldn't be it. If Adam had been that sick, why didn't anyone tell me? The answer was in the next paragraph. Adam begged us not to. He said you had just started your first real job and were finally happy. He didn't want your life to stop because of him. I slowly looked over at my brother. He couldn't meet my eyes. I told Mom and Dad to tell you I wanted a bigger room. He laughed bitterly. I thought you'd be angry with me instead of spending every day worrying whether I was going to survive. The room went completely silent. For 10 years. I'd believed my parents had chosen him. For 10 years. He'd believed I hated him. Neither of us knew the full story. I folded the letter carefully. So, you were sick. Adam nodded. I was. And now? He smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. I'm okay. Have been for years. Relief washed over me. Then something occurred to me. If you recovered, why was my bedroom door always closed whenever I visited? Adam looked toward the hallway. His smile disappeared. Because Mom never changed it back. I frowned. What do you mean? He took a slow breath. Come upstairs. I followed him. Every step felt heavier than the last. When we reached the end of the hallway, he stopped outside my old bedroom. The door was still closed. Exactly as I remembered. Adam rested his hand on the doorknob. Mom never let anyone use this room again. I stared at him. Not even you, he shook his head. I never slept in here. Confused, I slowly opened the door. The moment I stepped inside, I forgot how to breathe. My bed was exactly where I'd left it. The same bookshelf. The same posters on the wall. The same desk with tiny scratches from when I used to build model airplanes. Even the old hoodie I'd forgotten years ago was hanging behind the door. Nothing had been touched. Nothing. It looked as though I'd packed a suitcase one morning and never come home. I turned toward Adam. What is this? His voice cracked. Mom cleaned this room every single week. Every single week. I felt tears filling my eyes. Why? Adam looked away. Because she always believed that one day you'd forgive her and move back home. Before I could respond, Dad quietly appeared in the doorway. His eyes were red. He looked at the room, then at me. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "There's one more thing your mother wanted you to know." He reached into the wardrobe and pulled out a small wooden box I'd never seen before. On the lid was my name, and tucked beneath it was a second letter. I carefully took the wooden box from Dad. It wasn't heavy, just old. The kind of box that had been opened and closed so many times the hinges had started to loosen. My name was carved into the lid. Not written. Carved. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Mom's. I looked at Dad. When did she make this? He smiled sadly. The week after you moved out. My chest tightened. I slowly opened the lid. Inside were dozens of small things that shouldn't have meant anything, but somehow meant everything. My first school photo. The tiny plastic medal I won at a sports day in primary school. A birthday card I'd made for Mom when I was 6. The train ticket from the first football match Dad ever took me to. My university acceptance letter. Even the cracked watch I'd thrown away after dropping it in the driveway. I looked at Dad in disbelief. She kept all this? He nodded. She couldn't throw away anything that reminded her of you. Underneath those keepsakes was another envelope. This one was sealed with blue wax. Across the front it simply said, "For the day you finally come home." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter. No excuses. No long explanations. Just my mother's words. My beautiful boy, if you're reading this, then I probably never found the courage to tell you these things myself. The hardest decision I ever made wasn't asking you to leave. It was watching you believe I loved you less and letting you believe it. Tears rolled down my face before I could stop them. Every night after you moved out, your father would find me standing outside your bedroom. Sometimes I would make your bed. Sometimes I would fold clothes that nobody had worn in years. Sometimes I would simply sit on the floor because it still smelled like your aftershave. I knew you thought I had chosen Adam. The truth is, a mother never chooses between her children. She simply runs toward the one she thinks she might lose first. I couldn't read for a moment. The words blurred together. Dad quietly sat beside me. I begged her to tell you. Why didn't she? Because Adam made her promise. I looked at my brother. He wiped his eyes. I didn't want you watching me get weaker. I wanted you to build your life. I thought you'd only hate me for a few years. I never imagined it'd become 10. The final page of the letter contained one sentence. A sentence that broke me completely. If I don't live long enough to explain this myself, please don't let one painful month erase 22 beautiful years. I lowered the letter. Dad, when did she write this? He took a shaky breath. About 6 months after you moved out. She carried another copy in her handbag every single day, in case she finally found the courage. I couldn't stop crying. All those years. I'd replayed that dinner in my head, convinced I'd been replaced. Convinced I'd stopped mattering. And all that time, my mother had been carrying the same heartbreak, just from the other side. Dad looked toward the window. The last thing your mom said to me before she passed away was that she hoped you still called this place home. The room fell silent. I stood up and looked around. My old room. Untouched. Waiting. Not because they couldn't move on. Because they never wanted to. I walked downstairs and into the kitchen. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The old clock still ticked above the doorway. The same table where I thought my family had fallen apart. I pulled out a chair and sat down. Adam sat across from me. "So," I said quietly, "you never wanted my room." He laughed through his tears. I hated that room. It was freezing in winter. For the first time all day. We both laughed. A few months later, Dad asked if I wanted to help clear out Mom's wardrobe. While sorting through her things, we found a small notebook. Every page contained a date. And, beside every date, a short sentence. "Daniel visited today. He looked tired. I hope he's eating properly. He hugged me goodbye today. I don't think he knows how much I needed that." The final entry was written just 3 days before she died. "He smiled today. I think he's finally happy. That's all I ever wanted." I closed the notebook and held it against my chest. People often ask me what the biggest regret of my life is. They expect me to say leaving home, or not asking more questions. But it isn't either of those. My biggest regret is believing that silence always means someone stopped loving you. Sometimes, silence is simply love carrying a burden it doesn't know how to share. That old bedroom isn't mine anymore. Time has moved on. Life has moved on. But every Sunday, I still drive to my childhood home. Dad makes coffee. Adam complains about work. We sit around the same kitchen table where everything once fell apart. Only now, we tell each other the truth. Because we learned, far too late, that families don't break because life becomes difficult. They break when the people who love each other most are too afraid to say what they're carrying. And sometimes, the words you've spent years waiting to hear were written in a letter all along.